Welcome to Piano Video Lessons Year 1, Unit 2. Today's lesson is lesson number 9 and video 25 on YouTube. If you're not at PianoVideoLessons.com, just click the info card up here to come on over where you can find all of the materials you need for this lesson. So, in this lesson, we're going to be learning two new landmark notes. We're going to be learning Treble C, and we're going to be learning Bass C. And you probably noticed in our last finger gym in lesson number 8 that we used this bass C, although I haven't taught it to you yet. We were able to play it since all of the notes were written into the note heads. So now we're going to talk about how to remember these notes. So let's just have a look here at the grand staff. So middle C was found right here in the middle of the grand staff, and it has its own ledger line. Now, if I was going to count up to this next C, I would find out that it's an octave apart, or 8 notes. Octave is a musical way of expressing the distance of 8 notes. We've talked about the intervals of a second and a third, and if we get all the way to an eighth, we call it an octave. So this octave is 8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's find that on here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This note here is treble C. And you'll notice it's in a space, and it's 1, 2, 3 spaces up from the middle. Now let's find the other C. So we started at middle C, and we could go down 1, down 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we'll end up at number 8. So this is bass C, and it is down 3 spaces from the middle. So here we have bass C, and here we have treble C. So these two notes are also landmark notes. We had already learned middle C as a landmark, and we learned treble G as a landmark, and we learned bass F as a landmark. And as you notice, these are all equidistant from the middle. So treble G is 2 lines up, bass F is 2 lines down, and now we have these C's. So we have treble C in the 3rd space up, and bass C in the 3rd space down. Just like all of our other landmark notes, these notes are going to help us, if we memorize them, will help us to locate notes that are nearby these ones. So if we think about this treble C, and we think about a note that's on a line above it, we would know that that note is 1 note higher than treble C, and that would make it D. And again, if we think about treble C and think of the note that's on the line below it, we know that that note is B. So by memorizing these landmark notes, we're enabling ourselves to locate more than just those notes. And so what I'm going to get you to do now is have a look in your lesson materials at Unit 2, Lesson 9, the page here titled Mirror Cs in Spaces. And what we're going to do is look at this section at the bottom and do the exercise. So it says to circle all of the treble Cs and all of the bass Cs in this exercise. So treble C, if you remember, is this a space note or a line note? Yes, it's a space note. And which space is it in? Space 1, 2, 3, 4. Space 3. All right, so first let's look at the treble clef and the treble staff, and we're going to circle all of the treble Cs. So if we see any note that's in the 3rd space up, we're going to circle it. So that's a line note. This is a space note, and it's the 3rd space up. That's a line note. That's a space note in the 3rd space. That's a line note. That's a space note. Oh, it's the 3rd space. That's a space note, but it's only in the 2nd space, so this note is not C. We actually know that note from before. It is A. Here's a space note in space 3, treble C. Line note, space 3, treble C. Space note, space 4, not treble C. Space 3, treble C. Line note, space note in the 3rd space, treble C. All right, the next thing says to write second or third for each note that comes after a C. So let's go back over this line and examine the note that's immediately after the C. So this note is a space note, the treble C, and then if we go to the next note here, you see it's on a line. So going from a space to a line, neighboring notes, is that a second or a third? Right, it's a second. So just in here, I'm going to write second. Now I'm going to look at the next C, and I'm going to decide if the note that's with it is a second or a third. So I have this space note, and then I have a line note that's lower, and it's the line that's touching the space that C is in. So that's also a second. Now I have C and a line note. Is that a second or a third? Yes, it's a second. And then I have C in a space, and then I have another space note. So is that a second or a third? It's a third because I play the first note, I skip this line note, which would be the second note, and I play the third note. So that's going down a third, so I'm skipping a key. Here I have treble C and a line note. That's a second. Treble C and a space note. Skip the line, go to the space. That makes it a third. Then I have treble C and a line note. That's a second. And then I have treble C and a space note down. That's a third. So now what you should do is go through and play all of these notes. So C up a second, C down a second, C up a second, C down a third, C up a second, C up a third, C down a second, C down a third. All right, now let's do line 2, or no, let's do the bass staff. So here we have the bass clef on the bass staff, and we can remember that bass C is found 3 spaces down. So let's have a look at this first note. It is a space note, and it's down 3 spaces. So I'm going to circle it because it's bass C. And then I have a space note, but this one is in the bottom space, so it's a different note. Then I have one here. This is bass C, and it's the second space up from the bottom, or the third space down. Then I have another space note, and this one is in the second space down, so that is not bass C. Looking at the next note, it's a space note, and it's 3 down from the top. Then I have a line note, I have a space note that's down 3, that's bass C. Then I have a space note, but this one's in the bottom space, so that's not bass C. So what about this one? It's a space note, it's 3 spaces down, so it's bass C. And then we have a line note, and then a space note, 3 spaces down, bass C, a space note, 2 spaces down, not bass C, a space note, 3 spaces down, a line note, a space note, 3 spaces down, and another space note on the bottom space. All right, so let's go back and compare these notes to the ones after them. So we have bass C and then another space note. So from a space to a space is always a skip. So that is the interval of a third. And then from this bass C up to a space note, another third. Bass C to a line note. That's a neighbor, that's the interval of a second. Bass C down a skip, that's a third. Bass C to a line note, is that a second or a third? Yes, it's a second. Bass C to a space note, is that a second or a third? It's a third, from space to space. Here we have bass C to a line, going down, is that a second or a third? It's a second. And bass C to a space, is that a second or a third? It's a third. All right, so we can complete the next line in the same manner. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. Third space, line, third space, space, third space, line, third space, space 2, third space, space 4, third space, space 2, third space, line, third space, line. And back over these, from space to line, second, from space to space, third, from space to line, second, from space to space, third, from space to space, third, from space to space, third, from space to line, second, from space to line, second. Almost done. Which space am I going to find the bass C in? That's right, it's going to be 3 spaces down or 2 spaces up from the bottom. So here I have up 2 spaces and then up 3 spaces. Up 2 spaces, line note. Up 2 spaces, bottom space. Up 2 spaces, middle line. Up 2 spaces, up 3 spaces. Up 2 spaces, middle line. Up 2, line, up 2, bottom space. And then let's go back and figure out the distance between these. So from a space to a space is a third. From a space to a line is a second. From a space to a space is a third. From a space to a line is a second. From a space to a space is a third. From a space to a line is a second. From a space to a line is a second. From a space to a space is a third. All right, so you can go through these on your own sheet and circle all of the notes and name all the intervals. Now I'm going to go ahead and play these. Beginning with treble C, up a neighbor, treble C, up a skip. Treble C, down a neighbor, treble C, down a third. Treble C, up a third. Treble C, down a skip, treble C, up a second, treble C, down a second. Now bass C, up a third, bass C, down a second. Bass C, down a skip, bass C, up a neighbor, bass C, up a skip, bass C, up a neighbor, bass C, down a neighbor, bass C, down a third. All right, so in our next lesson, we're going to be using these C's, and we're going to be playing a piece of music called C's in Space. And in lesson 11, we're going to be learning a piece by Beethoven called Ode to Joy. So stay tuned for those, and I'll see you in the next lesson.